Robert Redford was 82 years old, quiet and calm throughout the interview. Again, Jimmy told the story. Redford pushed his armchair back, stood up, and aggregate changed. The Tonight appearance starring Jimmy Fallon. October 2018. Studios 6A at Rockefeller Centermost in New York City. The Admirers was electric with anticipation. Robert Redford. The Robert Redford, Hollywood legend, figure of American cinema, was sitting in the bedfellow armchair for what he'd appear would be one of his final television interviews before retirement. Jimmy was in his element, charming, energetic, allurement questions about Redford's absurd career. They'd been talking for maybe 8 minutes, bedlam about old cine sets, administration belief about Admiral and co-stars. It was absolutely what anybody expected, a warm cornball chat with an active legend. Robert sat in a bedfellow armchair with the airy aspect of a Edition who'd done 10,000 interviews. Elegant suit, that characteristic white hair, those weathered handsome appearance that had authentic archmen for generations. He answered Jimmy's questions with accomplished ease, occasionally animated at memories from 60 years in film. Aggregate was activity perfectly. Aggregate was safe. Aggregate was absolutely what backward night television should be until Jimmy said, "You know, I accept to acquaint you something. There's an adventure I've never told on this appearance about my father, and it involves you." Robert's announcement abashed slightly. Curious, attentive. "My dad," Jimmy continued, his articulation alteration from his accepted active host accent to article quieter, added personal. "He died in 2008. He was my hero. He wasn't famous. He wasn't in appearance business. He was a music abecedary in Brooklyn, but he was the best man I've any time known." The admirers quieted. This wasn't the Jimmy they were acclimated to. The comedian, the impressionist, the guy who played amateur with celebrities. This was article else. "Aback I begin out I was activity to host the Tonight Show," Jimmy went on. "The aboriginal actuality I capital to acquaint was my dad, but he was already ailing by then, cancer. And I bethink sitting in his hospital allowance, and he said to me, 'Jimmy, I'm so appreciative of you, but I charge you to affiance me something.'" Robert Redford hadn't moved. His easily were bankrupt in his lap. His eyes were bound on Jimmy. He said, "Promise me that aback you get that job, aback you're sitting at that desk, you'll bethink what matters. Not the fame, not the celebrities, the people, the absolute bodies who watch your appearance because they charge to beam afterwards at adamantine day." Jimmy's articulation absurd slightly. The flat was absolutely bashful now. And again Jimmy said, "My dad told me about the one time in his activity aback he met Edition famous. He was in his 20s. 1974 he was teaching music at Accessible Academy in Brooklyn, authoritative about nothing, disturbing to pay rent. And one Saturday he was in Central Park and he saw you." Jimmy chockfull midstream. The absolute flat froze. Robert Redford's aspect changed. He sat up straighter, his bankrupt easily tight. "My dad said you were aloof sitting on a bench." Jimmy continued to count a newspaper, and commonly he would never access anyone famous. He wasn't that affectionate of person. But article fabricated him airing over. He said, "Excuse me, Mr. Redford, I don't appetite to bother you, but I aloof capital to say acknowledge you." Jimmy paused, basic himself. "And you perceive what my dad said you did?" Robert Redford was absolutely still. "You stood up, you befuddled his hand. You asked him his name. And aback he told you he was a music teacher. You sat and talked with him for 20 account about teaching and why it mattered. You told him belief about agents who had afflicted your life. You fabricated him feel like what he did mattered." The cameras bent it, a distinct breach rolling bottomward Robert Redford's asperous face. "My dad said that chat kept him teaching for Edition 30 years. Jimmy said, his own articulation breaking now. "Every time he capital to abdicate because the pay was abhorrent, or the academy arrangement was burst, or he acquainted like Cypher cared about music apprenticeship anymore, he'd bethink that Robert Redford, one of the better cine stars in the world, had taken 20 account to acquaint him that teaching mattered." Robert Redford's jaw clenched. His easily absorbed the armrests of the bedfellow chair. "I never got to acknowledge you for that," Jimmy said quietly. "My dad died before I had the adventitious to acquaint you this story. But he fabricated me affiance that if I any time met you, I would acquaint you what that chat meant to him. So acknowledge you for actuality affectionate to music abecedary in Central Park who aloof capital to say hello." And again Robert Redford pushed his armchair back. The complete of the armchair abrading adjoined the flat attic was shockingly loud in the silence. Redford stood up, not the accidental continuing of Edition stretching but the burning movement of Edition who couldn't sit anymore. Jimmy froze, his aperture opened slightly. His hands, which had been gesturing during the story, chockfull midair. The admirers gasped. Questlove's drumsticks hovered motionless. The camera's accolade to adjust. Cypher knew what was happening. Robert Redford stood beside the bedfellow chair, his 82-year-old anatomy aback, attractive, able admitting the years. Tears were alive bottomward his face now, not aggravating to adumbrate them, not ashamed by them. "What was your father's name?" Redford's articulation cut through the studio, asperous with emotion. "James," Jimmy said, almost aloft a whisper. "James Fallon, James Fallon." Redford again, like he was aggravating to abode the anamnesis from 44 years ago. "Music abecedary Brooklyn." "Yes." Redford befuddled his arch slowly, a baby sad smile bridge his face. "I don't bethink every chat I've any time had. I ambition I could acquaint you I bethink that specific day, but Jimmy, I charge you to accept something." He absolved against Jimmy's desk. The producers in the ascendancy allowance were activity insane. Guests didn't airing against the host's board during interviews but cipher chockfull him. The cameras followed. Redford accomplished the board and placed both easily on its board surface, attractive anon at Jimmy. I grew up poor, Redford said. My mother formed assorted jobs. My ancestors struggled with alcoholism. Agents adored my life. Literally, they saw article in me aback I was aloof and affronted kid with no direction. They believed in me aback cipher abroad did. His articulation was afraid now. Aback I became successful. I fabricated affiance to myself that if anyone anytime came up to me and told me they were a teacher, I would stop whatever I was accomplishing and listen. Because agents are the absolute heroes, not actors, not cine stars, teachers. Subscribe and leave an animadversion because the best able allotment of this adventure is still ahead. The admirers was crying, not affably dabbing their eyes, absolutely crying. 300 strangers address attestant to article that had transcended entertainment. Your father, Redford continued, was one of bags of agents I've talked to over the years in parks, in restaurants, in airports. I don't bethink all their names, but I bethink why I did it. And Jimmy, I charge you to perceive that he had it backwards. Jimmy's countenance channeled confused. He anticipation I was accomplishing him a favor by talking to him, Redford explained. But agents like your father, they're the ones accomplishing the apple a favor every distinct day for abhorrent pay and no recognition. Shaping lives, alteration futures, I aloof accustomed what they were already doing. Redford accomplished into his anorak pocket. He pulled out a baby notebook, beat leather, acutely agitated for years. He addled through pages covered in his own handwriting. I started befitting this afterwards I angry 60. He said, every time I accommodated edition who tells me about their work, absolute work, not Hollywood work, I address bottomward their name and what they do. I capital to bethink that there's a absolute apple out there above the balloon of fame. He showed Jimmy a page. Even the cameras couldn't absolutely abduction the handwriting, but the action was clear. I'm activity to add your father's name to this book. Redford said, James Fallon, music teacher, Brooklyn, 1974. The man who kept teaching for 30 added years because addition told him it mattered. Jimmy stood up now too, advancing about from abaft his desk. His anxiously maintained host persona was absolutely gone, replaced by son afflicted his ancestor and affair the man who had a back shaped that father's life. Can I ask you something? Jimmy said, his articulation almost steady. Anything. Would you assurance article for me, article I could keep in my dad's memory, abaft the scenes, Fallon fabricated accommodation that defied every producer's expectation. Redford nodded. What would you like me to sign? Jimmy looked about the studio, at his desk, at the cameras, at the audience. Again he accomplished up and began alleviation his tie. This, Jimmy said, affairs the tie from about his neck. My dad gave me this tie, it was his favorite, he wore it to my academy graduation, to my wedding, to the hospital on the day my daughters were born. I've beat it on this appearance added times than I can count. He handed the tie to Redford. Would you assurance it? So that every time I abrasion it I'll bethink that the chat you had with my dad mattered, that affection matters, that demography 20 account to allocution to a drifter can change their absolute life. The flat erupted in applause, not the agog acclaim of entertainment, the reverent affecting acclaim of bodies witnessing article sacred. Redford took the tie with both easily like it was precious. He looked at Jimmy. Do you accept a pen? Jimmy effective one from his desk. A simple ballpoint pen, annihilation fancy, and handed it over. Robert Redford, allegorical amateur and director, sat bottomward on the bend of Jimmy's board and anxiously wrote on the central of the tie, his 82-year-old Duke abiding, admitting the tears still active bottomward his face. Aback he finished, he stood and handed the tie aback to Jimmy. Apprehend it later, he said quietly. Not on camera, but this is the moment no one in the flat and no one watching at home anytime saw coming. Jimmy took the tie, nodded, and again did article that would be replayed millions of times. He stepped advanced and accepted Robert Redford, not a handshake, not a affable hug for the cameras, a absolute embrace. Two men who had never met afore tonight, affiliated by a music abecedary from Brooklyn who had died 10 years earlier, captivation ceremony added while admirers and millions of admirers watched in tears. The cameras backward on them. The bandage didn't play. The producers didn't cut to commercial. The moment artlessly existed, raw and absolutely unscripted. Aback they assuredly separated, Redford kept one Duke on Jimmy's shoulder. Your ancestor aloft acceptable son, he said. He'd be appreciative of who you've become. Jimmy couldn't speak, he aloof nodded, Redford angry to the audience. I'm 82 years old, he said, his articulation accustomed through the studio. I've lived an absurd life, I've fabricated movies I'm appreciative of, I've won awards, I've been adored above measure. But you perceive what? I achievement my bequest as he paused, attractive out at the 300 faces watching him. I achievement bodies bethink that I chockfull and listened. That I fabricated time for agents and nurses and firefighters and all the bodies accomplishing absolute assignment in this world. Because that's what absolutely matters, not the movies. The people, the admirers stood, every distinct actuality continuing acclaim that lasted for about 2 minutes. Jimmy and Redford stood calm at the centermost of the date while the acclaim done over them. Back it assuredly subsided, they alternate to their seats, Jimmy abaft his desk, Redford in the bedfellow chair. But article had fundamentally changed. The account affiliated for edition 10 minutes, but it was different. Added honest, added vulnerable. Jimmy asked questions he never asked in a accustomed interview. Redford answered with a candor he rarely showed. They talked about fathers and sons, about bequest and memory, about the moments that ascertain a life. Back the articulation assuredly concluded and they went to commercial. Redford stood to leave. But afore he absolved off stage, he chockfull and angry aback to Jimmy. "Thank you," Redford said. "For what?" Jimmy asked, confused. "I'm the one thanking you, for befitting your affiance to your father, for cogent me that story, for reminding me why I started accomplishing this all those years ago." He absolved off date to clap applause. Share and subscribe. Make abiding this adventure is never forgot. Afterwards the appearance wrapped, Jimmy went to his bathrobe allowance and opened the tie to apprehend what Redford had written. In accurate handwriting it said to James Fallon, the abecedary who mattered, and to his son Jimmy, accumulate authoritative your ancestor proud. The best roles we comedy are the ones off-screen. Our Jimmy had the tie framed. It hangs in his appointment at 30 Rock. Beneath it a baby applique reads James Fallon 1948 to 2008, music teacher hero dad. 3 months later, Robert Redford appeared his retirement from acting. In his final interview, he mentioned that night on the Tonight appearance and said it reminded him what he capital his bequest to be. Not the films, the conversations, the moments aback we chockfull assuming and became human. Jimmy wears a replica of that tie on the ceremony of his father's afterlife every year. And every time he tells one adventure about a abecedary who afflicted someone's activity because affection echoes beyond decades. And sometimes 20 account in Central Park can change everything.